The offer came wrapped in silk words and poison intent. They didn't slide a check across the table. They slid a confidential folder, thick, heavy, and deliberate, like men who believed paperwork could erase people. Inside was an offer worth $750,000, and across from me sat a man who believed I was desperate enough to take it. He had no idea that the entire room, the company that paid for it, and the reputation he worshipped all rested on something I controlled. My name is Ethan Cole, and this is the story of how my wife's family tried to erase me from their bloodline, while unknowingly depending on me to keep their empire alive. For 4 years, I had been married to Lena Whitmore, the only daughter of Jonathan Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Biotech, one of Boston's most respected pharmaceutical firms. To the world, Jonathan Whitmore was a visionary. To his peers, he was ruthless. To me, he was a man who never once bothered to learn who I really was. And I let him. Because sometimes the most dangerous position in the room is the one nobody notices. When Lena and I met, there were no power plays, no last names, no expectations. Just two exhausted strangers sitting on opposite ends of a hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m., sharing terrible coffee and laughing at how awful the vending machine sandwiches tasted. She was a clinical researcher working brutal hours. I was supposedly a systems consultant. We bonded over fatigue, sarcasm, and a shared belief that people who bragged too much usually had the least to say. On our third date, she warned me. "Just so you know," she said carefully, "my family is intense. Money, reputation, control. They'll judge you before they ever listen." I smiled and told her the truth. "Then they won't like me." She laughed and fell in love anyway. Jonathan Whitmore did not. From the moment Lena introduced me at a charity gala, I was assessed, categorized, and quietly dismissed. My suit wasn't custom enough. My watch wasn't loud enough. My job title didn't carry weight. Jonathan's wife, Marianne, was subtler, smiling while asking questions designed to expose limitation. "So Ethan, do you see yourself advancing?" "Advancing where? Toward what?" People like them never asked to understand. They asked to measure. And I failed their scale perfectly. We married quietly. No society pages. No donors. No champagne tower. Just 50 people, a small garden, and vows that meant something. Jonathan shook my hand afterward. Firm grip. Cold eyes. "You take care of her," he said, not as a request, but a warning. I promised him I would. And I kept that promise, even when his family spent years trying to convince Lena she'd ruined her life. They never insulted me directly. That would have required honesty. Instead, it came in suggestions, comments, comparisons. "Did you hear Thomas just bought a vacation home in Aspen?" Trevor's promotion came with stock options. "Lena, sweetie, are you sure you're happy living so simply?" We lived in a renovated loft near the river, not flashy, not cramped, just ours. And while Lena never complained, I saw the pressure, the subtle erosion. The way family dinners left her quiet on the drive home. The way her confidence dimmed under constant judgment. She once asked me, voice barely above a whisper, "Do you ever feel like they're waiting for me to wake up and regret choosing you?" I took her hand and answered honestly. "They're waiting to be proven wrong." What she didn't know, what no one in the Whitmore family knew, was that Ethan Cole, the unremarkable consultant, had another identity. One I'd spent nearly a decade building, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. 10 years earlier, while Jonathan Whitmore was being praised in business magazines, I was sitting in a windowless office analyzing biotech acquisition data for hedge funds that never made headlines. I wasn't brilliant. I was methodical. I noticed patterns others ignored. And one company appeared again and again in risk reports, always barely surviving, always funded just in time. Whitmore Biotech. Great science, terrible structure, and one catastrophic weakness buried deep in its licensing agreements. I didn't expose it. I invested around it through shell firms. Through blind trusts. Through a private consortium registered offshore and invisible to public scrutiny. By the time Lena and I married, I controlled critical patents Whitmore Biotech couldn't operate without. Not chairs. Not board seats. Something far worse. Dependency. But I said nothing. Because I didn't marry Lena to win a war. I married her to build a life. The invitation came on a Thursday. Formal. Carefully worded. Too polite. Dinner this Saturday. Just family. Important discussion. Lena read it twice. Then sighed. That's not good. I nodded. When people like your parents say important, they mean irreversible. She hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't go. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who chose love over comfort, truth over approval. I think it's time, I said softly. For what? For them to show us who they really are. That night, Lena barely slept. She didn't know why she was nervous. I did, because I knew what Jonathan Whitmore did when problems didn't solve themselves. He paid. The Whitmore residence sat behind wrought iron gates that opened silently, like the house itself didn't want witnesses. Lena stared straight ahead as we drove up the circular driveway. The mansion hadn't changed since her childhood, white stone. Tall windows, manicured hedges trimmed into unnatural perfection. Everything about it screamed control. I used to think this place was magical, she said quietly. Now it just feels heavy. I parked between two luxury SUVs and shut off the engine. That's because it was never a home, I replied. It was a stage. She squeezed my hand before we got out. Whatever happens in there, she said, don't let them turn us against each other. I promised her they wouldn't. I already knew they'd try. Marianne opened the door herself. That alone told me everything. When staff disappeared, it meant calculation. Lena, she said, pulling her daughter into a stiff embrace. You look thin. Not beautiful, not happy, thin. Then her eyes moved to me. Ethan, not cold. Not warm. Dismissive. We were led into the dining room. Long table, 5 place settings. 5. I noted it immediately. Are we expecting someone else? Lena asked. Jonathan's voice came from the far end of the room. Just an advisor, he said casually. Family matter, but with documentation. My jaw tightened. Documentation always meant terms. Dinner was a performance. Jonathan talked about regulatory hurdles at Whitmore Biotech. Marianne mentioned opportunities Lena could have had. A man in a gray suit sat silently to Jonathan's right. Legal, not social. They waited until dessert. They always do. Because people are more agreeable when they think the hard part is over. Jonathan folded his napkin and leaned back. Ethan, he said, tone professional now. I'm going to be direct. Lena stiffened beside me. Good, I replied calmly. So am I? He nodded as if he'd expected compliance, not parody. You and Lena made an emotional decision, he continued. And while I respect love, reality eventually demands correction. Marianne reached for Lena's hand. We worry about you, sweetheart. You've sacrificed stability. I felt Lena's fingers tremble. Jonathan slid the folder across the table. Inside were contracts. Legal language. And a single sheet on top. $750,000. Tax-free. Immediate. Sign the separation agreement, Jonathan said, and you'll walk away financially secure. Lena shot to her feet. You're trying to buy my husband out of our marriage. Jonathan didn't look at her. He looked at me. You understand this is generous. I did. Generous for a man he believed was small. I picked up the paper. Read it slowly. Not the amount. The clauses. They were confident. Too confident. Does Lena know you planned this without her? I asked. Marianne's smile cracked. We assumed you'd handle the unpleasant part. Lena's voice broke. So this was never about me being happy. Jonathan sighed. It was about damage control. Silence swallowed the room. Then Jonathan said the sentence that ended everything. You were never meant to last. Lena inhaled sharply. I felt something in her shatter. That's when I stood. I didn't raise my voice, didn't smile, didn't threaten. I did something far worse. I'd like to make a phone call. Jonathan frowned. This isn't necessary. It is, I said. Because before I decline your offer, you should understand who you're negotiating with. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. One rang, two. Ethan, a voice answered. Is it time? Yes, I said. Please explain to Mr. Whitmore why this conversation is happening. Jonathan scoffed until the voice continued. Mr. Whitmore, the man said calmly. My name is Daniel Ross. I represent Helix Rights Consortium. Jonathan froze. Marianne's face drained of color. The gray-suited man leaned forward. Daniel continued. Helix owns the exclusive global licensing rights to 3 gene therapy delivery patents your company uses in over 60% of its revenue-generating products. Jonathan swallowed. That's impossible, he said. Those rights are controlled by Ethan Cole, Daniel finished. The room collapsed into silence. I looked at Jonathan. You offered me $750,000, I said quietly. You should have checked what I was worth. Jonathan Whitmore didn't sit down. He couldn't. The name Helix Rights Consortium hung in the air like a death sentence. The gray-suited advisor beside him slowly closed the folder in front of him, his earlier confidence evaporating. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Jonathan. Jonathan, the man said carefully, we need to pause this conversation. No, Jonathan snapped. This is a misunderstanding. I leaned back in my chair. It isn't. Daniel's voice continued through the speakerphone, clinical and precise. Mr. Whitmore, Helix acquired those patents over a 7-year period through layered purchases approved by international regulatory bodies. Your legal team negotiated renewal terms with us twice. Each time they accepted revised clauses. Jonathan's face twitched. I don't remember authorizing. You didn't, Daniel said. Your board did. You delegated. That was Jonathan's greatest weakness. He believed control meant visibility, not understanding. And while he'd been building an empire, I'd been studying its load-bearing walls. Lena turned to me slowly. Her eyes searched my face, not for anger, for truth. You own the foundation of my father's company? I nodded. I do. How long? Long before I met you. She sat down heavily. Jonathan finally found his voice. You lied, he said, pointing at me. You deceived this family. I met his gaze evenly. I answered every question you asked. You just never asked the right ones. Marianne stood abruptly. This is insane. You pretended to be ordinary while manipulating us. I corrected her gently. I am ordinary. I just never needed your approval. Jonathan rounded the table, rage overtaking reason. You think this gives you power over me? No, I said calmly. It gives me power over outcomes. Daniel spoke again. Mr. Whitmore, your current licensing agreement expires in 90 days. Without renewal, you cannot legally distribute 6 of your flagship therapies. Jonathan's face collapsed. That would destroy us. Yes, Daniel replied. Which is why Ethan asked me to be present. Jonathan turned to me. What do you want? There it was. Not apology. Not remorse. Fear. I stood and looked at Lena, not at Jonathan. I want my wife to stop being treated like an asset. Lena's breath hitched. I want her to never again be told she chose wrong. Jonathan's voice cracked. And if I refuse? I smiled, not cruelly, but finally. Then Whitmore Biotech becomes a case study in arrogance. Marianne whispered, Lena, say something. Lena stood. Her voice was steady. You tried to sell my marriage. Jonathan flinched. You decided my happiness was negotiable. She looked at me. And you kept this from me? I nodded. Yes. The room held its breath. She stepped closer. Did you ever plan to use it against them? No. Against me? Never. She studied me for a long moment, then turned back to her parents. You taught me money equals security, she said. But tonight you proved money equals control, and I don't want that life. Jonathan sank into his chair. Defeated, not by contracts, by his daughter. Daniel cleared his throat. Ethan, should I proceed with the restructuring proposal? Jonathan's head snapped up. What proposal? I looked at him. One that removes you from operational control. The gray-suited advisor stood. That would require my consent? I finished, which you no longer have. I turned to Lena. This ends tonight, but only if you're okay with what comes next. She took my hand. I married you for who you are, she said. Not what you hide. Then she faced her father. You don't get to decide my future anymore. Jonathan bowed his head. For the first time in his life, he had no leverage. The meeting ended without dessert. No one had the appetite for it. Jonathan Whitmore sat motionless as Daniel ended the call, his empire suddenly reduced to a countdown clock, 90 days. That was all that remained between dominance and collapse. Lena and I didn't argue on the drive home. We didn't speak at all. The city lights reflected in the windshield, stretching into long, quiet lines, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but heavy with truths finally exposed. After several minutes, Lena broke it. You were never going to tell me? She said softly. I was, I replied, just not like this. She nodded. I believe you. That was the moment I knew we'd survive it. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. But respect? Respect only grows when tested. The next morning, Jonathan called. I didn't answer. The morning after that, his board did. By then, the legal mechanics were already in motion. Helix Rights Consortium issued a formal notice. Renegotiation required. Whitmore Biotech stock dipped 12% in one day. Analysts called it unexpected volatility. Internally, it was panic. Executives who once waited outside Jonathan's office now avoided eye contact. Because when power leaks, rats smell it first. 2 weeks later, an emergency board meeting was held. Jonathan entered as CEO. He left as Chairman Emeritus. A title designed to soften humiliation. Operational control transferred to a professional management team, one I had already vetted. Jonathan wasn't fired. That would have been vengeance. He was sidelined. Which was worse. Marianne called Lena every day. Lena didn't answer. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. You can't heal while still bleeding. 3 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived. No letterhead. No assistant. Just ink and regret. Lena, I thought control was love. I was wrong. I taught you strength, but forgot to teach humility. If there is a way back into your life, I will wait. Dad, Lena cried, then folded the letter carefully. We'll talk, she said, but not yet. Life didn't change overnight. We stayed in our apartment, still cooked together, still argued over dishes, still laughed at bad movies. But something shifted. Lena stood taller, lighter. And for the first time, she wasn't carrying the invisible weight of disappointing someone. As for me, I finally stopped hiding, not the wealth, the intention. 6 months later, Whitmore Biotech announced a major restructuring. Jonathan spoke briefly at the press conference. He looked older, humbled. When asked about Helix Rights Consortium, he paused. Some lessons, he said, come late but they matter most. He never mentioned my name. He didn't need to. That night, Lena and I sat on our balcony, watching the city breathe. Do you ever regret it? She asked, not telling them sooner. I shook my head. No. Why? Because now I know who loved you without conditions, and who loved control more than happiness. She smiled faintly. You're terrifying when you're quiet, I laughed. I've been underestimated my whole life. She leaned her head on my shoulder. So what now? I looked at the city. At first, I thought power was about leverage, I said. Now I think it's about choice. We'll fund research that helps people who never get invited to those dinners. We'll invest in companies that build quietly. And we'll live small on purpose, she kissed me. That's the man I married. Jonathan and Marianne eventually came to dinner. No lawyers, no folders. Just pasta and uncomfortable honesty. Jonathan apologized, properly this time. Not to me, to Lena. And that mattered more than anything he could have said to me. The irony still makes me smile. They tried to buy me out of their daughter. They thought money defined worth. What they didn't understand was simple. I never wanted their approval. I wanted their truth. And they gave it to me at the exact moment they lost control. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed because you didn't look powerful enough, remember this: the loudest people in the room rarely hold the most power. Sometimes the person being ignored is the one holding everything together. My name is Ethan Cole. I was never just a consultant. I was never just a husband. And I never needed permission to be exactly who I am.